regenerative agriculture has potential to reverse climate change because it can capture so much carbon above ground. We're planting twice the amount of trees in a parcel compared to local monoculture, but also below ground. A healthy soil captures so much more carbon than a depleted soil.
This is Evolve CPG, a community of purpose-driven, sustainable product brand leaders who not only believe in better, but actively pursue it. I'm your host, Gage Mitchell, and today we're speaking with Antoine Ambert, Senior Director of Sustainability at Alter Eco, who recently launched the Alter Eco Foundation to further their work transforming the chocolate industry by converting monoculture farms to a regenerative agroforestry model. As I was diving into your LinkedIn, which I realized I hadn't dug super deep into in a long time or maybe ever, I realized that you had started your journey with some business degrees, business training, before you dove into Alter Eco, where you started kind of as an assistant and then moved into director and then moved into sustainability. So first off, I'm curious to know what drew you to the business education, and then from there, how did you kind of connect that dot into a company like Alter Eco?
Yeah. So actually, before business school, where what I studied was political studies and specifically development economics. That's where I actually was taking a path to do a PhD in development economics because that was my passion. I wanted to try to, solve the world's problems, inequalities between countries, and it was 12, 14 years ago, and still today. But I feel, emerging countries are, facing humongous challenges with growth around, again, inequalities and making sure there was enough regulation so that wealth was redistributed within those emerging countries, and of course at the global scale between, again, Europe, the US, and then, the rest of the world. And I felt that even though I was taking that research path, this actually was in 2008 during the crisis. And therefore, it was extremely difficult to find grants to actually do a PhD, because PhDs, to find grants. All of that was in Europe, so that may be a little different in the US, but I was supposed to find grants so that I could, again, be paid during the few years of the PhD. And even though the research topic at the time, I was really going to microfinance with India and in Bangladesh. I went there for a little bit to study some women's group that were working with, I remember it was buffalo milk in the region of Hyderabad in India, which was fascinating. And so there was a lot of interest for that research. But again, that didn't really work out in terms of finding the right financing to do the actual PhD. And so I decided to go to business school because, business school is what gives you a job. And I was fairly interested in the business aspect. I also knew that even though I wanted, I also was a doer, right? I like to get things done, and I like to, finish projects that I start fairly in a timely manner, not a new one. PhD tends to be quite the opposite, right? You have one and only project, and you do that. Yeah. So I had a lot of anxiety. And today, fast forward, I actually don't regret 1 second that this didn't work out. I'm glad that the grant thing didn't work out. So what happened is that I went to business school. So again, after development economics, so with that background of, really wanted to understand things, wanted to solve things, not just building a business to make money, right? But really having an impact. And what I got to do two things. First, I did a major in entrepreneurship. So again, there was that idea of building projects and having an impact, kind of like a short term. And of course, it was touching everything, right? From just, purely opportunistic projects where you can make money to, again, things that were more socially focused with impact, which is what I definitely was leaning towards. And then I got to go to Peru to study for 6 months. That was in 2009. And that was my first interaction with fair trade. And to be honest, I was not fully very aware of it before. Again, through microfinance, touched around the certification and what that would mean, but never really experienced it firsthand. And what happened in Peru is that I got to join a group of students that were literally Amazon, visiting a co-op, visiting a farming group as part of a project for a cosmetic company. And I just joined by curiosity. They invited me. I was not part of it. And this community was called the Tweetables, which is an amazing community in Peru that is known for their culture within the forest. So they don't really farm anything. It's really cultivating whatever the forest provides. And so one thing we were going to explore was a fruit murawari, which was it's almost like acai, like a berry that grows at the top of very tall trees. And it was pretty fascinating because literally they would go in the forest. We went with them and look for what trees were ready to be harvested. And literally would climb with pretty tools, but very thin, climb to the top, cut the fruit, and then come down and then collect it. Which is really that idea of the forest provide, and then you can, as long as you do it in a sustainable way, you can get as much as you want to be used for, either trade or your own needs. And what I thought was even more fascinating right after is at night, the group that I was following held a meeting with all the villagers to talk about how much products the French cosmetic company needed, and how much product the village could provide. And what was fascinating is it was a real conversation. Nobody telling others what to do, or it was literally like room for we need to talk. Everybody needs to express where they're coming from. The goal was, let's make sure we don't destroy, you don't give us everything right now, but then in 2 years, then there's no more to harvest, right? So let's do it in a sustainable way so that for everybody's interest, for this company that needed, a supply that's going to be, fairly resilient for years. And of course, for the community that needed also a source of revenue to stay, sustainable years after years. And then of course, for the environment, it was in everybody's interest to do this in respectful of the forest, respectful of the ecosystem. So again, I didn't know what Hungary was before going there. Didn't really know what fair trade was until then. I didn't really know what traditional trade was about, besides, again, what I studied in economics, which was, again, mostly, driven by supply and demand. And this was really eye-opening for me, that we could have direct relationship with producers at the other side of the world. We could have direct conversation with producers supposedly in the most remote area in the world, in the middle of the Amazon. No, yeah, it took 9 hours of boat to go see them, but it was totally worth it. Yeah. And it's doable, right? It costs money and time, probably a little bit, but it's totally doable. So that was very eye-opening, and that everybody was up for that conversation, right? Like, again, there was a clear understanding at the beginning of that conversation that this was in everybody's interest. Nobody was exploiting anybody. Nobody was taking advantage of anybody. That's really how when I came home, I was like, okay, this was something. I don't know what I'm gonna do with this, but this is something.
Yeah.
And then I discovered Go, and that clicked, right? I was like, oh, okay, I actually can work in this. I can do something myself. I can work for a company that supports that. And so I applied for it was an internship. You mentioned, it says assistant on my LinkedIn, I guess, but before that it was an internship. And so I was supposed to go there for 6 months, and I got in, and then 10 years later, here I am.
Refused to leave. So
what
was the internship? What was the role?
It's the back office role. Pretty much it was, meaning there was a lot of processing purchase orders and invoices, but also doing some communication. It was kind of like a catch-all because the company was really small. It was 4 people. So it was our 2 co-founders, Elmore and Mathieu. It was our VP sales, Kate, Tierney, who was president, and then our director of operation, Jean Cloutier, who also stayed pretty long, for many years in the company after that. So therefore, it was kind of like sitting everywhere. I was working with Jean a lot around in operation, right? So again, processing orders, processing making sure we are buying the right things. I mean, again, I was not doing, of course. So it was awesome because it allowed me to really touch on any piece of the company that still today, we're still doing today, right? Like with better systems, with bigger processes. But when, in a team meeting, we hear that the operation team is dealing with, purchase orders that are delayed, or like some payments that are delayed, I'm like, okay, I used to do this. Yeah. So I understand what you're talking about. So that was very useful. But most importantly, though, it was very timing because the company just closed their Series A during my time there. So they had funds to create a marketing department. And that's when I had a conversation with the founders, which was, all right, like, do I want to do this? The back office was fine, but, what exactly do I want to do? Marketing sounds very interesting. Again, the good thing with Alter Ego is that there's so many stories to tell that it's not, I feel like the marketing I had learned in business school more about creating content that people want to hear, coming up with stories, creating strategies based on what consumers want. It was not of that at the time. It was like, okay, we have all this content. Business founders have so many stories to tell, and we need someone to start pushing it to consumers, and hopefully they'll want to listen. And of course, there was a lot of problem with that. At the time, we should have probably been more consumer focused than just pushing stories we had. But it felt really true to at least where I was coming from, because it was really about the people we were working with. And again, like from a development economics point of view, it was about what they were going through and how a company like that for them, more than it was not pure marketing about what consumers wanted to hear. Does that make sense?
And at that time, there weren't a lot of those stories being told too. So it made sense to tell those stories. And then, of course, other companies followed suit. And then we're also telling those stories. And that's when, like you said, you need to start focusing on, okay, well, what's our unique piece and what do the consumers care about? But that makes sense. That explains your transition a bit more. So you moved into the marketing role. And I know, having worked with you for quite a few years in that there's also been multiple rounds of changes through not only, the company itself, obviously, as it grew, but like, I think we're on we're calling it 4.0 now. So I'm curious, as someone in marketing, like, the rebrand is always kind of a exciting but scary thing because you don't know how it's going to go and how long it's going to take and how consumers are going to react. But you went in there like multiple times and then just kept diving back in. So I'm curious to know, from your perspective, kind of leading this world-changing company and kind of continuously evolving that brand, the more you learned, the more you kind of evolved. What was that process like? What were the biggest challenges? What was the most exciting about it?
Yeah. So first, I think the main reason why I kept rebranding is because the market really evolved around those topics of sustainability and what people care about. Because evolving, I think we're getting to a peak where consumers really care. Climate change is every day in the news. There's no way for people to just disregard it and not listen, right? So I think we're getting to that peak where brands need to act and be part of the solution. But in the past 10 years, even though it's been slowly growing to that peak, every year was a bit different, right? And what people wanted to hear was getting different. So I think we're kind of like, through the rebranding, trying to catch those trends and staying ahead of the curve as much as possible. The other reason why I think there was so many rebranding is also the evolution of our portfolio. That was one of the big factors behind our rebranding, is that we used to have a lot of different products, different categories, from chocolate to quinoa to rice and sugar. And then by more and more focusing on chocolate, as you can understand, that also drove different positioning, different communication strategies. So I think therefore, coming from those two different drivers, the market and then our portfolio, it's been very interesting to stay malleable, to stay flexible and adjust, right? And because we're still a pretty small brand, even though we're from people to about 25 today, we're still small in the sense that again we can adjust. So what has been challenging though is to, when you do a rebranding to address a market trend, let's make sure we stay true to ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we've been true to ourselves for the past 10 years and still today. So even though it was a challenge, I believe, because again, there's always this force pulling you. What is the strategy that's going to potentially sell the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
Disregarding who we are is like, what's the one that consumers really want? And like, it's like, no, but really, but who are we? And the reason I think we stay true to that is because at the end of the day, who we are is what we know best. So it's one thing to understand what consumers want today in chocolate, but if we've never done it and that's not what we really want to deliver, great, right? So it's, if we stay true to who we are, then that's what we can deliver. And for Alter Eco, it's sustainability, right? Fair trade is in our DNA. Then, having a great impact on the environment. Since 2005 that we created the company, that our founders created the company, it was about fair trade, right? It was about working directly with farmers. So that's in our DNA. But very soon after that, 3 years after that, because we were working directly with farmers, then organic became important, right? Because we were hearing from farmers that their health was getting affected using pesticides and fertilizers. All right, cool. Let's transition to organic. Everything is organic. And then working with farmers in Peru in deforested areas in 2008, we heard that planting trees could actually help. And there was a business model behind paying farmers to plant trees and selling carbon credits to companies like us to be carbon neutral. Now, carbon becomes to the company, right? And then 2013, packaging. Plastic pollution is a problem. If we put out a compostable packaging solution that actually exists and that actually protects our product, all right, now packaging is part of our sustainability model. So I really believe that work with farmers as a direct relationship, that forces you to listen, is what created all the basis for sustainability efforts, initiatives, and alternative strategies all those years, and made Alter Eco such a sustainability-oriented company. Again, not because that's what consumers wanted, not because one of our founders wanted that this was the way businesses should work. It's because it was just working with those farmers that every step of the way it became obvious that we could do better, right? That we could do better by being organic. We could do better by planting trees. We could do better by putting compostable packaging. So during that evolution of learning in that sense, I think therefore when we started listening to consumers, and that's what led to rebranding, it was about how do we take those consumer trends around sustainability and food and chocolate, and again still stay true to who we are. So the first rebranding in 2011 was actually about talking, because consumers, actually not even it's like consumers buy chocolate because of the taste, and we were pushing the mission only. We were pushing farmers, we were pushing and so we're like, we're not going to, if we don't tell consumers that we have the best tasting chocolate. And that was in 2011, which again, today is different, right? We wouldn't do the same strategy. Back then, we felt that I remember a graph internally that we had where the word mission was in big in our brain. It was like a brain, right? It's our brain. The word mission was in big and the word food was small. And like, okay, let's swap that, right? The word food is going to be big, we're going to be foodies, and then the word mission is going to be in small. Again, a bit of a challenge. Is mission, so we're reducing mission? Like, how does that work, right? Like how? And they were like, no, it's just, the mission stays the same. It's just we're going to, communication-wise, push food, and taste. All right. It worked. I think it connected us to our terroir. It connected our farmers' stories to the taste, right? Like our quinoa, for example, we had great stories around the fact that it comes from the birthplace of quinoa, and that's why it's so fluffy, and it's a bigger quinoa than other quinoas on the market. It tastes nuttier. It's because it has that story behind it that our farmers have been cultivating it for hundreds of years. So that was still very true to our mission, right? We could show those stories because we know our farmers. And then fast forward to 2017, our second rebranding, that one was really about focusing on chocolate, right? Because we discontinued our rice, our sugar, so going away from commodities. And that one, therefore, was a bit more challenging because it's more about how do you it's value-added products, right? How do you explain to consumers, again, your chocolate is different than the one next door, and it's actually easier to do on chocolate than it is on like rice and sugar, right? Because again, it's a product that because it's a value-added product, there's more that comes into process, into the different ingredients that we source. There's more stories that makes that final product that could allow us to differentiate it from others. So again, we went from a brand that was more about, we called it sustainable foods from around the world. That was the 2.0, to a brand that was more about indulgence and chocolate. That one, to be honest, was the most challenging, I think, because focusing on indulgence, it's hard. Then what's the place for the mission, right? Where does the mission fall when you talk about how delicious your chocolate is? And that's when now the 4.0 that you worked on very hard and greatly, I think is real mission. It's like I do believe it's also because it's the right time. I don't think maybe that wouldn't have worked 4 years ago. Who knows? Yeah. But right now it's like, no, like it's about, let's put our values at the forefront of our pack. And I'm so excited about it, really, because I think this is probably the best decision I believe we could have made is really to put our mission at the forefront with this image of trees and all the great work we do with regenerative culture.
Yeah, actually that ties into your role transition as well, because then obviously from marketing you moved into sustainability role, kind of working on mission, helping launch the foundation. So how did that role change come about? I guess what inspired that change and what's been new or challenging about this different role?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think since going back at the time when I was the intern and we were starting a marketing department, I think it's always been my passion comes from that work with farmers. My passion comes from that experience in Peru. My passion comes from visiting our farmers year after year in Peru and Thailand, and really connecting and understanding what else can we do to have a better impact on them, but also on the planet. And while the marketing role also needed that in order to tell the stories, I needed to get the story, right? I needed to go on site and understand our impact to tell the story of that impact. I think as a company growing fast and that wants to grow further, the marketing needs go beyond today just telling our sustainability story. And even though I'm extremely excited that our sustainability is the focus of a marketing strategy, there are, strategies around marketing that have to do with sustainability, right? It's like what are the best channels to get the best ROI on our content, and where is our messaging going to be the most efficient? And even though I did enjoy doing that for several years at Alter Eco, because I did, lead marketing for 8 years, and there was a lot of learning around, the digital channels, and again, our entry into e-commerce and how to lead people to our website and to converting into sales. Like my passion goes lie more into the sustainability camp, and therefore it did make sense we brought someone with experience in marketing to lead those efforts, and then myself to focus on our sustainability initiatives. Because as I mentioned that we're growing and therefore we need strong marketing strategies, we're growing in a highly competitive sector, and therefore we need really strong sustainability strategies. We need to stay at the forefront of ahead of the curve and stay the pioneers. And therefore it made sense also to have someone myself dedicated to that.
Nice.
And so that includes all of our efforts around packaging, around compostable packaging. Again, commitment, 100% of our packaging is either recyclable or compostable. That commitment was for January 1st, 2021, December 31st, 2020. So that's coming up. We're there, so we're very excited. But we'll have to stay there, right, as we launch products. So there's a lot of efforts to do there. And then, which is what we put at the forefront of the pack, is our efforts around sources cocoa in a regenerative way, so regenerative culture. And so what I'm really excited about, taking a lot of my time, is we launched a foundation. We launched the Alter Eco Foundation. We just launched it 3 weeks ago. And finally, we are really going to put money on the table to invest in projects that will transition cocoa farmers from what we are farming today, which is monoculture, to a way that's regenerative, that's sustainable, that's going to be on the long term what the planet needs, which is we call it regenerative culture as an umbrella. And then the model specifically that we use is dynamic agroforestry, which is pretty much planting different crops around the cocoa tree to regenerate the soil and help better yield and stay healthy. So really exciting. I couldn't be happier with the evolution of my role because, again, that, as I said, that's my passion. And I think we can have a great impact as a foundation and as a company in this topic in regenerative agriculture. I think that's the future. So very, very excited to do that.
Yeah, and obviously in our industry, regenerative is kind of the future. That's where a lot of people are looking to go towards. So of course it makes sense that Alter Eco is on the forefront. They're pushing into that space and being an innovator. One random question that just popped into my head though is like, how did organic get to a point where it wasn't regenerative in the first place? Like how did, like a lot of what you're doing with the foundation is going into these farming co-ops and giving them guidance and funding and whatever to like replant the forest in there, which provides shade and more nutrients in the soil and alternative sources of income and different things like that. But since you're pretty close with the farmers and have been working in this field for a while, what's your hypothesis for how we went away from that kind of more natural way of farming to this more, even if it is organic, a little bit more of a monoculture where the cacao wasn't grown under shade trees and stuff? It just seems to make logical sense, financial sense, and everything else. So I don't know. I'm just curious to know if you know how we got away from that.
Yeah. Well, I come from a place where in the center of the country where monoculture is the norm. Like it's a pretty rural area. We are surrounded by mountain, valley that's pretty fertile, and fields of corn, fields of beans, fields of beets. That's what I would see, going to school every day. And it was working, right? Like there was productivity, there was, the yields that the farmers needed were there. I think at the time, like often, unfortunately, I feel like in economics and politics, we think short term, right? We think 20 years, 50 years maybe, but we don't think 200, 500 years. And therefore, for 50 years, this was going to work, right? Like the soil is fertile. Let's grow one culture. Let's put the right fertilizer for it, the right pesticide for it, the right, even maybe temperature and environment if it's under greenhouse, and just let's produce as much as possible, right? Year after year, year after year. I could see how that made sense at the time. Like from a scientific point of view, it's like, okay, sure. The problem, I think, what everybody missed is what it was going to do to the soil after 20, 30, 50 years, right? And it's hard because we couldn't see it, right? Because even after 20 years, I mean, the wheat is still great, was still great, because again, now we're like more like 50 years after, and then we start seeing that the crops are worse in quality and worse in yield year after year. At the time, it was really hard to project, right? I mean, I think it's too bad that there was no, agronomist or scientist or, engineers that were not able to project that. I wish we had done that. And granted, I'm sure there are actually some people were able to project it, it's just they were not listened to, right?
Exactly.
But the people who were making the decision were not able to project it. Because I do believe, I don't know, it depends maybe country by country. And I know the story of the US post-World War II that needed to feed, the country, and that kind of like industrial farming was potentially driven by the wrong motives around money and around, short-term yields and short-term returns. But they were also good, real goal population of wanting productivity, of even having farmers making enough money right at the end of the month to feed their family. I think this model was driven also by, good faith and good goals. Unfortunately, on the long term, that's not working, right? Farmers are not now able to feed their families anymore because, again, their yields are decreasing year after year, and also their crops are not at all resilient to bad weather. The second there's a storm or not enough rain or too much rain, it's a catastrophe, right? It's like they lost their entire annual income. And what agroforestry does is prevents that, right? It creates resilience for farmers, resilience in front of climate change, in front of today's situation. But even 50 years ago, when the soil was fine, it was a better, I guess, situation from farming point of view. It was still creating, again, resilience for bad years. There's always bad years in farming, right? And that's why I think agroforestry is so revolutionary and so important today is, first, from a farmer point of view, right? It assures, again, if one crop is not doing great, there's other crops that it can harvest and sell and have some revenue. If all the crops that it can make money out of are bad this year, there's still some crops it can use and eat, right? So in the worst case scenario, there's still food on the table, which in Ecuador, Peru, and Dominican Republic, when we go from, that's very important. And even in Europe and the US, to be honest, right? It's like let's go to that fundamental place where a farmer should be able to grow food to eat himself. And with monoculture, that's not the case. If you only grow cocoa, you cannot eat cocoa. Even if you only grow wheat, you most likely don't eat your own wheat, right? Like it's just
can't even afford it anymore.
Exactly, and there's that too. Exactly, that was the point with quinoa. We saw that where quinoa's price was so high that even though quinoa farmers were traditionally mostly eating quinoa, it's such a strong grain that was providing a lot of nutrients and didn't need a lot of very diversified diet, they couldn't afford to put on the. That is a system that monoculture created, that productivity-driven system created, that we're trying to go against to have something called more human scale, right? That's closer to what farming used to be. Because I'll pause there for a second and say it, because this is not a new model, right? This is nothing. I said it was revolutionary. It is revolutionary because the current system it's going to take a while to change it. So we need a revolution to change it. But it's indigenous, communities used agroforestry and regenerative agriculture for centuries. And as we all know, nobody really listened to neither Native Americans or Indians. All that knowledge was completely buried in a nutritious way. So let's try to unbury that and learn. And that's what's also interesting for me is that we're not reinventing the wheel, right? We're just promoting a way that has proven efficacy and successes in the past. We don't even have to prove that it works. We just have to communicate, and it's advocacy work more than, oh, look, we came up with the best solution ever. No, it's like we're just, if anything, as foundation is giving a platform to communities that have shown with their own ways that it was working for them, and then we hoping for new communities to adopt that new way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like the term that you were just using there, the revolutionary, because in my mind, as you were saying that, I was thinking like re-evolution and the idea of just going back to the way things were working before we messed it all up. And that's the way I've kind of seen organic for a long time. I know when I was early organic adopter, and I'd have lots of coworkers or friends being like, "Ooh, what's that weird organic stuff you're eating? It's probably full of bugs and tastes like dirt," or something like that. And they thought it was this new thing. But my favorite way to explain it was always, no, this is just the way food had been since the beginning of time up until just recently in like the 40s or 50s, when we started changing things and deciding we had a better idea than nature had. And now we're just getting back to it. So we just had really a 30 to 60 year blip where we went off the path, and now we're trying to rejoin the path. So regenerative, I think, is like taking that the next step further, right? It's not just, removing all the nasty stuff we started putting in there, but it's also kind of replenishing the soil we depleted, and replenishing the economies, replenishing the nature that we took out?
Yeah, you're right. Like organic was a necessary first step, right? By removing the bad stuff, removing the pesticides, the fertilizers. And then now it's, but let's go one step further. Again, going back to what nature, intended, but it's still one step further away from the current, conventional farming system in monoculture. It's not about removing what's bad. It's about creating a system that, gives back to the soil, gives good nutrients to the soil. I have a story on that around a Thai farmer that I visited back in 2015 that was telling us before growing organic rice, he was growing conventional rice. And pharmaceutical company, not pharmaceutical, sorry, like fertilizer company, a chemical company came to him one day and all villagers and say, all right, we can give you fertilizer. It's very potent. It's, your yield's going to be amazing. It's really great. And then we have those pesticides that go with it. It's going to be amazing, right? It costs that much money, but we're going to sell that much rice that it's going to totally offset the cost. And so they all went in, right? Because again, that was just the way, right? Nobody was questioning it. And then that's the farmer told us that after a few years, really starting seeing his house, degrade because he was spraying so much chemical every year. And then besides his house degrading, he also was seeing his bank account being in a very problematic situation. He was completely in debt because he would need to buy fertilizers and pesticides, those inputs, before the harvest, before getting any money for this harvest, like a month before. And he needed to take debt, often with those companies who pretty much would just like lock farmers down and just don't move. You're ours. We own you because you are so much money. So all of your harvest pretty much goes to us. Like all of your, the first ones to be paid is the pharmaceutical, is the chemical company, not the farmer, right? And so, of course, when some years, sure, the yields were great and the harvest was great. But years where it was not that great, again, they would give money to that company to pay their debt, and then nothing would be left for them.
Oh my God.
And that farmer had the courage to say, no more. I'm gonna stop all of that, mostly again because of his health. The debt was going on since day one, but it took the health piece for him to say no more. And then he had also the leadership to convince his peers and created a co-op called Serene Co-op, who we've sourced rice from for many years, and transitioned to organic, right? And the co-op was here to, help the transition through certification, and then they also became fair trade, and knowledge, right? And also financial aid, away from like to pay back those debts, right? And get away from that dependency from a chemical company. And for me, that story, it's kind of to answer that question, how organic is one's first step, right? Before regenerative, but again, very necessary because they needed to go through that to then now think about regenerative. But when you're in debt and when you're sick and then when you're spraying, there's no way you can think of like, oh, why don't I plant other crops in my field and see if the soil will get better? It's not about the health of your soil, it's about your own health at that point, right? So you need to get away from that, be organic. And then I agree. I mean, organic monoculture is definitely not the answer anymore because the soil is being degraded. And then as a farmer, you start thinking of your soil and then start implementing regenerative culture.
Yeah. And then one thing that I always am kind of burdened by too in our industry is that in order to do things the right way, or at least prove that you're doing things the right way, we as more mission-driven businesses are burdened with all these extra costs, like certification costs, for example. Like you have to pay all this money to be organic certified. You have to pay all this money to have your B Corp status and do all this other kind of stuff to prove that you're doing things the right way, where in reality, it should be flipped the other way around. You should have to pay to do things the wrong way, and therefore we're incentivizing doing it the right way, right? But with that said, I'm curious to know if Alter Eco is planning to add yet another badge to your collection and pursue regenerative organic certification down the future, or and if so, how do you typically share those costs with the farmers?
That's a good question. To answer the second question around shared cost, at least with fair trade. Often that's why co-ops exist, is the co-op is the mechanism to share the cost, right? So that it's not a burden on the farmer. Mm-hmm. At least that's how we've seen it. I know a lot of other brands actually get involved in making the co-op certified and therefore can participate in the cost. We've worked with co-ops that were already established and therefore already had that cost certification. And again, to my knowledge, they had done it through the co-op mechanism to combine, resources, and with 3,000 farmers, they can pay for the certification. Today, though, is still an issue around. You probably know that fair trade certifiers, there's multiple of them, and still tend to be a little bit in a conflictual situation, and therefore co-ops sometimes have to choose. And I know that if they wanted to work with the three of them, it's an extra cost, right? And it's a burden on them. So that's definitely still a problem, especially with fair trade, which is about empowering farmers and give more money back to them. Why do they need to bear that cost, right? So, exactly, yeah. Your suggestion of like brand getting involved, and especially again with for the same thing, why should they pay 3 times, right? So there's probably something there. On the regenerative one, it's something we're asking ourselves: is what is the power of the seal? From a consumer point of view, we are questioning it. I remember this survey a few years ago that showed that there was higher trust of a consumer to their local farmer on the farmer's market than to the USDA seal or the fair trade seal, which makes a lot of sense. So knowing that we work directly with farmers, can we be the farmers market brand of chocolate and quinoa, even though you cannot buy that on your farmers market? We can bring that to you with that direct relationship. So from a consumer point of view, again, we're questioning it from a third-party auditing point of view, verification point of view, so that we do actually what we say. I still think personally it's important, right? I think greenwashing is still a problem. So if we let brands say whatever they want without any verification, that doesn't help anybody. So I think for me, certification is stay important for that, right? So that someone verifies that we are actually organic, that we are actually fair trade, that we're actually regenerative. So when you take those two things in consideration, maybe consumer doesn't need them, but we need them from an ethical point of view, then we kind of it's a case-by-case decision. So for ROC, I think we'll see where its certification itself is going, what the standards are about. Right now with the foundation, we're kind of putting in place a transparency model, right, that really communicates a lot about what we're doing, what are the projects about, what are the results of those projects. That's one way of third-party certification. It's not a third party, but it's really being transparent around that's the regenerative model, and everybody can kind of judge if the results are good or not, rather than having someone certify it. Also, to be honest, because it's a new model. It's ROC is a new certification. There's only one, so we'll see a few years down the line if it makes sense to get certified. To be honest, though, as a consumer, personally, I see it even when I do look for the seals, because if when I buy vegetables, if I don't see the organic seal, I don't really trust it, right? Even if it's like maybe at the local farmers market, but at the supermarket, even if it says locally grown, nothing tells me that there's no pesticide on this thing. So especially when I buy them to feed my babies, right? So I still really believe there's strong value to certifications, personally at least.
Yeah. And even though, like you pointed out, that a lot of people trust their local farmer at the farmer's market, and if they say they're not putting any pesticides or whatever on it, or if they're saying we grow it organically, we're just not paying the certification, there is something to me when I'm walking through a farmer's market and I see the organic logo up that feels like they're not just marketing. They care, because they did go that extra mile to get the certification. At the same time, I'm like conflicted because I know it is a pain and it is expensive, and how necessary is it when you're a local farmer selling to just individuals who trust you and know you. But at the same time, it does show like a bit of that commitment. And I know Alter Eco's, always been known for going above and beyond, like with the compostable packaging innovation that you've done, that nobody was demanding that you move into compostable pouches, but you took it on yourself to invest in it and try to create the material, create the supply chain, front the costs for all the testing and everything else to make it more possible for both you and other brands. So I think there are consumers out there that see that and respect that, as well as, trusting their local farmer. But they like, especially more and more these days, the younger generations are wanting to shop with the brands that are standing up for something they believe in, instead of just like jumping on the bandwagon after it becomes popular. With that said, I'm curious to know, I know that Alter Eco's a B Corp and has been a B Corp for a long time, but also that Alter Eco like consistently wins like a best of the world kind of award through B Corp. I'm curious to know how B Corp affects your company culture and how you keep pushing forward, innovating in kind of a holistic way through your commitment to like B Corp principles.
Yeah. For me, I'd say that the day we became B Corp certified was such a it was really just confirming everything we had been doing. As I mentioned, in 2005 we started fair trade. In 2008 we went organic. Then we started being carbon neutral. Then in 2013 packaging. So when we became B Corp certified, which I believe was around 2010 or 11, it was confirming that idea that as a business you can have a positive impact all along your supply chain, not just in one aspect. And you're not just a fair trade chocolate or an organic chocolate or, again, a carbon neutral business. You can really take all of that into account when you make decision. So we approach B Corp in that sense is, finally there's a certification that envelopes everything we do, that idea of a full circle sustainability approach, right? And including your employees and all of that. And since then, well, first, we really stayed true to that. So we stayed true to our values of being full cycle sustainability. So really, again, every time we launch something new, like, looking at packaging, okay, let's make it as sustainable as we can if the solution exists, right? Or when we hire, let's make sure we're as fair as we can. And B Corp, every 3 years, when we get the questionnaire to be certified again, same, like plays that role of a check, right? It's like, oh wait, we gained points on that, and that makes sense, because since then we didn't have compostable packaging before, now we do, so great, we gain points, right? Normal. But maybe other things were like, oh, we lost points this one. Why? Oh yeah, they said we should have this information public around our practices X and Y, right? It's like, okay, we don't have it on our website. Great, that's true. More transparent. Great. We don't. It's not that we didn't have it for any reason. It's just, like they're pushing us in that sense, right? To have those best practices of sustainability that I'm sure, knowing B Corp, they also learn from their community, right? Some businesses are doing X and Y, and then they can integrate that into the questionnaire for the next time as a best practice, right? So that's really how I see it. We've learned a lot from the community how to push the envelope further. But even though we were already pushing the envelope, is again how to do it, how to always do it in a better way. And that concretely also happens in B Corp as a lot of networking events or conferences or collaborative groups that I'm often part of. And for me, at least, it's one of the most fulfilling ones that I attend, because we're fair finding group, right, as a start, and then it's always conversations on really important topic, right? Of course, recently it's been a lot of climate change and how businesses can help, reverse climate change. But overall, I feel like it's always so on point with what our values and Alter Eco are, but also what I believe businesses should stop or worry about in terms of their impact on people and planet. So it's been such a great group to exchange ideas with, learn from, and as this group expands, they have more and more big companies joining And us as a small company, again, there's so much to learn from them. And I believe also maybe something that we can teach bigger groups based on our experience. So it's been a great community to be part of.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I imagine that with your new role, since you're in charge of sustainability, does that mean the kind of B Corp certification fits within your role now? And if so, what's on the horizon for your role and your next big challenge that you're trying to accomplish to maybe improve your responsibility?
Yeah. So I work on the B Corp certification. Our quality manager is also part of our. She's in charge of all of our certification per se, so she's a big part of that process. But definitely anything that we can do to again keep her B Corp certification, keep her score high, improve her score, falls under me in terms of what else can we do, and maybe less about B Corp. As I was saying, B Corp was more as we learn a lot from the relationships within B Corp, but then the actual certification is more of a verification thing, right? Internally, like a little check, right? Then something that we use to lead our decisions. Leading our decision is really how can we stay a pioneer, right? How can we stay a leader in sustainability? Because that's such who we are. That's who we've always been, and therefore, as we grow, as more and more companies out there also into sustainability, let's just make sure that we play that role of staying at the forefront. And again, not just to be ahead. It's really because we just feel like it's a responsibility, right? Because if not, the opposite is what? It's say, okay, great, we have compostable packaging now. We have organic filtered cocoa. We're good. We can just stay that way. We're more into like, okay, no, what else can we do? And that's why we decided to focus so much on regenerative agriculture, and that's where really my role is that's what I focus the most on, is because it's still something new to us. With the project that's going on in our supply chain, I started in 2015, so we still have there's some years behind us around in terms of like learnings, but it's still a small volume of our farmers, and therefore now what the foundation is about is to again put money on the table to transition as many farmers, the one we work with, but also beyond. Mostly cocoa farmers, but it could be also, other ingredients that we source, other projects out there with other farming communities that we want to support to really, how can we transition as many farmers as possible from, again, the current monoculture system to regenerative agriculture, especially dynamic agroforestry. And there's a ton of work, as you can imagine. And what I like about being focused on that is that I think it's really going to create impact. Because we could also say, at Alter Eco, we do regenerative, we do compostable packaging, we do, we're carbon neutral. We can also start looking at, new ways to, again, be a better business on a lot of different aspects, logistics, on, anything like trucks, for example, that we have going around the country through our distributor to distribute our product. Like there's so many aspects as a business that we can touch from a sustainable point of view. And even all important to us, focus is important in order to have a good impact. So really, regenerative agriculture and agroforestry is our priority. Compostable packaging is a very strong commitment, is the close second in terms of, again, we'll work really hard to also stay at the forefront of new technology and making sure that we use, what has the best impact in terms of packaging. The third focus that, again, I don't mean to dismiss it as a priority, is that we are a climate neutral business, right? And part of being a climate neutral business is when you measure your emission, you also look at reduction strategies, right? What's the biggest contributor and how do we reduce? Good news here is that objective number 3 matches objective number 1. Our biggest contributor is ingredient sourcing. That's 33% of our emission. And the most of that is cocoa. And so cocoa, by sourcing it, the reason why cocoa is such a big emitter is also because of the way it's grown, right? It's grown on land that used to be forest, that was cut down to grow cocoa. That has a huge carbon impact. It's used, even though it's organic, it's grown in a way that, needs to be water for irrigation, that creates emission, needs to, to bring, even if it's organic compost and fertilizer, it needs to be brought, it needs to be produced somewhere, it needs to be brought into the parcel, that creates emissions, right? If all of our cocoa tomorrow was regenerative agriculture, well, nonetheless, you reduce those 30% emissions to zero, but you actually capture carbon, right? So as a company, we start offsetting our trucks, going around the country with the carbon we capture in Peru and Ecuador, and hopefully to a point one day that we are really, really climate neutral. Because today we're climate neutral because we have a remaining 3,000 metric tons a year that we compensate by planting trees or conserving forests, right? But ideally, one day, it's all integrated into the same supply chain, right? It's like, because we grow cocoa a certain way, we're climate neutral because we capture carbon that then we emit through trucks, which, by the way, we don't own the trucks, because if we own them, they're electric, but we work with distributors. And even though they also try to make efforts to be better, they're not there yet. So that's something, but we offset those emissions. Even though we don't own those trucks, they're part of our program. They're part of the emissions we capture, because ultimately, if there's no trucks, our products don't do consumers, and then we don't exist. So, but therefore, you can see how, again, as a company, sustainability has a lot of legs, right? But that regenerative agriculture piece is the one that has I think, the biggest opportunity for a company to have the biggest impact for our farmers. Because again, as I said earlier, regenerative agriculture allows farmers to grow food that they can put on their table if one day the harvest is bad for cocoa, if one day the price of cocoa is low, or at least lower than expected, even though we're fair trade, still fluctuation above that fair price. So great benefits for farmers. And then for the planet, again, like, regenerative agriculture has potential to reverse climate change because it can capture so much carbon above ground. We're planting twice the amount of trees in a parcel compared to cocoa monoculture, but also below ground. A healthy soil captures so much more carbon than a depleted soil. Depleted soil in monoculture releases carbon year after year.
Yeah.
If you get back life into that soil, carbon gets drawn down. And as Project Drawdown says very well, the great book, we can reverse climate change by drawing down carbon. It's not the fate that the atmosphere is a greenhouse now, and that the temperatures are going to rise is not sealed. We can reverse that. We can change that. It's going to take a lot of efforts, but there's a way. We can draw down that carbon, and regenerative agriculture is one way to do that. And we're really excited to be part of that.
Yeah, and not only that, but with all of those extra inputs, it's also conserving water and a bunch of other benefits too. Like, it's too many benefits to even mention in your marketing. So, but it's, I think, one thing that resonated with me.
I know, as you try to do.
Yeah, that's the burden that you have / we have with a lot of our clients, is there's too much story to tell. You don't have to manufacture anything. It's more about like whittling it down to the most important things. But one thing that resonated with me with what you just said is the idea of focus, and kind of knowing your most important things that you need to work on and where you're innovating, et cetera. But one thought that comes to mind is that as a company that's always evolving, it was fair trade, and then it was, organic, and then it was regenerative, and who knows what's next. But so I'm curious to know if after you solve this regenerative thing and maybe convert all your cocoa farmers to agroforestry, is there an idea in your mind of what's next? And then follow up, complementary question to that is, how do you as a company / how do you personally keep evolving? Like, how do you keep pushing yourself forward like that?
So to your point, the first step was to transition all of our farmers. And that's not a small commitment. We'd love to be able to make that commitment soon. I think but we're still looking for enough regenerative cocoa today to, well, there's two things. You can transition farmers, it takes 4 years. or you can work with farmers that have already transitioned, right? In order for 100% of the cocoa we source to be regenerative and from agroforestry. So we're looking at both, right? The foundation is going to really work on transitioning farmers. And then are there new sources of cocoa that we could start working with that are already established as regenerative for us to source from? That's what we're looking at right now. That's a lot also of my role in order to, once we've established those, new sourcing supplies supply chains, can we therefore within 5 years, 10 years, have 100% of our cocoa be regenerative? Because again, any complex model, any great solution that can reverse climate change is not a 6-month solution, right? It takes time, but that's also, I think, what makes Alter Eco so special. The 10 years horizon doesn't scare us, right? We're not here to have short-term returns. We know that that's not how it works, right? And so that's what we're working on. So again, I just wanted to answer your question around what's next. There's so many sub steps into regenerative that's what's next, right? What's next is we have 10 years to farmers. And we have 10 years to, again, start looking at start sourcing cocoa from non-monoculture groups that already exist in the world. And in that sense, I think what's very exciting is, again, in addition to looking at our cocoa farmers today and say, okay, let's transition to agroforestry, is because agroforestry is about different crops. For example, today we source vanilla from farmers in Madagascar, and we've been sourcing from them for years that we use in our chocolate. Vanilla grows very well with cocoa in agroforestry. So there's an idea, and actually a project started, of could the vanilla farmers actually grow cocoa, right? And if so, it's going to take 4 years, because once you plant a cocoa tree takes 4 years before you can harvest cocoa. But we strongly believe that in 4 years, that cocoa could be great. And then with that, it will be a real agroforestry model. So there will be bananas, there will be mangoes, there will be beans, there will be timber trees. But it would be, the idea is that we're already buy banana from you, we could buy cocoa from you. That's all agroforestry. The soil is doing great. That's a great start, right? And then the farmer community we work with, that relationship is that much stronger, right? Because we not only buy one crop from them, but two. So I think for me, that's what's next, is that integration, that holistic approach of our supply chain, of there's so much more we could do with each we work with, right? If we start looking at them in silos of okay, we get cocoa from you, we get coconut from someone else, we get vanilla from someone else, is having those maybe fewer but really meaningful, really impactful relationships and supply chain, where there's a real empowerment with, as we grow and as our volumes grow, and there's more purchases that we do from farmers, to really focus, as I was saying about focus earlier from a strategic point of view, you can do the same focus on the supply chain point of view. If you focus a lot of your efforts in a few groups, that group will get that much more, empowered and value added, and literally just dollars, right, from us, but ultimately therefore more impact. From a risk diversification point of view, that's not great. You're supposed to diversify your supply, and you're supposed to, not put all your eggs in the same basket. From an impact and sustainability point of view, I personally love the idea to really protect the community. Okay. Second part of the answer of your question is, if we're looking at it, again, one community, one farming community, what else can they provide for us? The same way is true from a pure ingredient point of view, meaning we're looking at byproducts, right? Can we use whatever is wasted, cocoa, when we use bean? Can we use the pulp? What can we do with the pulp? Can we make sugar with the pulp? Can we use the pod? Can we packaging from the pod? Compostable packaging from the pod. That's also a great story, because then from a carbon point of view, we're not moving things around, eucalyptus South Africa to make compostable packaging, and then sugar from Paraguay, and then cocoa from Ecuador. Everything can come from Ecuador, from one farm. That's a great story. And I think there's a way to do that. We're not there yet, but you're asking me what's next. I think in the coming 5 years, I think we can get there. There could be packages of cocoa pulp from a cocoa pod. They're right out there right now, not especially in the format we need, but maybe in the format we need in 5 years. There could be, again, polished sugar from cocoa pulp. Again, like anything we can use from those byproducts that we can therefore communicate about and have a better impact on that farmer, because that farmer will end up selling things that now he throws away.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. Like what sparked in my mind with that thought was like a truly single origin chocolate bar, where it's not just the cocoa that's single origin, but it's also, you got your sugar and your vanilla and like whatever else from that same farm. that would be a pretty cool story. Nice. Okay, well,
Totally, I agree.
This was a fun chat. Thanks for sharing more about Alter Eco and your career journey with us. As always, it's fun to catch up with you. Appreciate you taking a little time out of your pandemic schedule to share with us. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Antoine, his company, or the Foundation's mission, go to alterecofoods.com. Subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel for more innovator interviews, expert advice, and leadership discussions. If you like this episode, hit that like button and share it with your colleagues. And of course, send us feedback and ideas for who we should talk to next at evolve@modernspecies.com. And learn about our new online community at evolvecpg.com. See you next week.